world's first flying bike hitting the market. Right now, only available in Japan for about $500,000.
A hoverbike made by Japanese manufacturers is set to launch in the US next year.
The reveal of Kawasaki's famous hoverbike was one of the biggest turning points in tech history. Even though it was meant to be a simple tech demo, it ignited a fierce race between governments, companies, and militaries. With billions of dollars poured into developing flying cars and hoverbikes, all striving to lead the charge into the future of transportation, how did a simple tech demo spark such an intense battle? And what might the outcome be?
Well, we don't know the safety rate of them yet because this is new and novel technology. They don't store very much energy, they don't have very much range or endurance.
Join us as we explore how one event reshaped the future and launched a global competition. The machine that changed everything. Long before the big event that revolutionized the future of the auto industry, people had long dreamt and wondered about what the future would be like. And interestingly enough, flying hoverboards were always part of the grand picture. For this reason, they have been used in movies, cartoons, comics, and video games with a high emphasis on how far technology will advance in the future. Hollywood was enthralled for years after the release of the movie Back to the Future Part 2 in 1989, which had a scene where Marty McFly glided through the air on a pink hoverboard while running away from danger. That scene left a mark in people's minds as they wondered when the world's leading engineering companies would finally be able to make one. And this was where things got interesting. Different companies tried to make that scene a reality with modern tools and technologies, and surprisingly enough, they all succeeded, but with a huge caveat. To start with, many companies came up with hoverboards that relied on jet power, but they were loud, dangerous, and very difficult to control. Other companies tried to pull this off through magnetic levitation boards, and it worked so well that it almost looked like magic when demonstrated. The problem, however, was that these boards only worked on special roads with expensive magnets embedded in them. All these attempts from the 90s to late 2019 showed that the idea was possible, but none of them were practical enough to be used by those who were willing to purchase. Nothing truly lived up to the hype, and the idea of a board that could fly freely and safely for more than a few seconds was slowly becoming more fictional than real. With each passing year, the dream stayed out of reach until 2017, the year when one man and his team of engineers from Japan made up their minds to turn the tech industry upside down by making the impossible technology a practical reality. This man was Daisuke Kitano, and his engineers made up the small company known as ALI Technologies. This company was still little and very new to the tech space, and was barely a year old when Daisuke brought the idea. Ali Technologies at the time was like the new kid on the block, first beginning as a tech startup in 2016 with the hopes of producing new things that would eventually compete against the heavy hitters in Japan like Sony and Honda. But what they lacked in numbers and resources was made up for by their strong convictions that the distant future could be built in just a few years. And what was Daisuke's vision? To build a sleek flying vehicle that was suitable for one person, something that looked cool and easy enough to be used by children on their way back from school and across the street. Something that didn't need wings or relied on roads. And what was the result they ended up with? A strange-looking machine with 6 rotors, a motorcycle-style seat, and a body made of carbon fiber. Instead of looking like a futuristic skating board that levitated as people thought it would, it looked more like an awkward mix between a drone and a sport bike. The prototype was called the X-Turismo, and while it didn't look as cool as they envisioned, it had to be that way for the vehicle to be fast and stable enough to stay in the air. None of the engines, sleek enough to get into the cool design they had in mind, could last more than a few seconds without either cooking itself from overheating, consuming all power within seconds, or tumbling and crashing from lack of stability. Every fix they came up with led to new problems, and the only way to make it work was by getting rid of the old designs and going with something more practical. But even then, the engines overheated, the machine always drifted off course, and the expensive fuel it ran on was used up over very short distances. At this time, the future of ALI technologies was looking grim. Not only had they spent most of their resources making this machine, but it turned out no investor was willing to give them the support they needed. For most within the Japanese tech space, Daisuke Kitano's company was dead. But amid this uncertainty, there was a bit of hope. Just a few weeks after the machine was demonstrated to hundreds of investors, Daisuke Kitano got a call from the CEO of Kawasaki Heavy Industries, Yasuhiko Hashimoto. Kawasaki Heavy Industries, at the time, was one of Japan's oldest and most trusted companies that made some of the country's most advanced motorcycles, jet skis, bullet trains, and spacecraft parts used by NASA. Kawasaki Industries' CEO saw huge potential in the business and invested heavily in Daisuke's project. Quietly, they supplied all the resources needed by ALI Technologies to make their dream a reality. A few months later, the support system grew into a public partnership. Thanks to this, ALI Technologies was able to improve their old engine into something more portable and sustainable. The machine they built was able to fly 40 minutes at 60 miles an hour in wind tunnels and open fields. Like a large mechanical bird, it hovered over the ground and only roared like a small plane. It wasn't a quiet machine, and it cost almost $500,000 worth to manufacture. But it worked, and that was what mattered the most. The big day came in October 2021 at the Fuji Speedway, and hundreds of people gathered to see what they had in store for the tech industry. The new and improved X-Turismo appeared with a rider strapped in. Unlike when the X-Turismo was showcased before 2020 to investors, this time it looked like a hybrid between a small motorcycle and a large drone. But even though it didn't still measure up to Daisuke Kitano's original features, the design was visually stunning and tantalizing to the audience that they couldn't help clapping with excitement, even though most of them weren't sure of what to expect. The body was sleek, made of carbon fiber, and painted mostly in black and red. It was designed like a sport bike, with a sharp nose and a saddle-type seat, but without wheels. It had 6 large propellers, and its total size was about 12 feet long. Add in a powerful Kawasaki 1000cc engine, and we have enough power to lift one person seated on it like a motorcycle for maximum stability and comfort. Cameras flashed as the machine's rotors started spinning, and the noise of the engine grew louder. Slowly, the machine lifted off from the ground. It hovered, it turned, soared above the heads of the spectators as they watched with excitement. There were no wires or tracks found anywhere, just a relatively portable machine moving in very smooth patterns that seemed to break the laws of physics. Bodies of this event went viral on the internet. Though it wasn't marketed as a hoverboard in the traditional sense, news headlines called it just that. The once reluctant investors were now willing to pour millions of cash into this new concept to make it a more practical reality. It was barely a year ago when over a dozen companies and startups were racing to build better versions of that machine, and the events that followed started one of the fiercest and most competitive races in the tech industry. The global race to air mobility. Thanks to that event alone, science fiction had quickly become a reality, and the race to build the first mass-produced and affordable hoverbike now involved government agencies and the most powerful arms of various militaries. Among the private companies that joined the fray was Hyundai, the South Korean auto company, and the day it announced its plan to build air taxis with help from the government was a huge turning point in the auto industry. The vehicles they had in mind weren't helicopters or planes, but were electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. They even established a taxi division called SuperNal, which is now working on completing a new transport system by late 2028. The air taxis they showcased promised to carry people across busy cities while flying over traffic to reach their destinations easily. Unlike Kawasaki's X-Turismo hoverbike, Hyundai promised by late 2022 that their air taxis would run on renewable energy. The first tests and development centers were now based in California and South Korea, with other places under construction in various countries across the world. Hyundai meant business, and they wanted the world to know about it. But there was another heavy hitter on the horizon. Toyota, another auto giant from Japan, also wanted to cash in on this. They were stepping into the sky, but in a very different way. Instead of building their flying vehicle from scratch, Toyota invested in an American startup that needed resources, just as Kawasaki Industries offered help to ALI Technologies almost 10 years ago. This American startup was Joby Aviation, and it was already testing its own aircraft. It killed like a small aeroplane, but took off and landed like a helicopter. Better yet, this prototype machine was much quieter than Kawasaki's hoverbike. Instead of just giving money, they focused more on sending engineers to help design and fine-tune the vehicle. Toyota had one goal in mind: create a safe, reliable flying shuttle that could carry up to 5 people over entire cities in a few minutes. Joby's initial plan was to launch their vehicles in the US early this year, but they didn't have the resources to pull it off. With Toyota's engineers now at the helm, the launch date hasn't been projected yet. Reports suggest they might have rebuilt a lot of things from the ground up to improve the machine, meaning we might not be getting updates from them anytime soon. But all hope wasn't lost, as other surprising names were joining the race as well. General Motors, the makers of Chevrolet and Cadillac cars, unveiled their concept car. Volkswagen did the same thing in China to serve the country's megacities. The idea was to launch this in the upper middle-class areas first, until the technologies became cheaper to use and manufacture. To make this work, smaller Chinese companies like Xpeng Aero HT and Yihong started testing manned drones in cities like Guangzhou and Beijing. Xpeng shocked the world in November 2024 with its Aero HT flying machine that combined a 4-seater car with a detachable aircraft having foldable arms and rotors. The machine has a combined range of over 1,000 kilometers, and the company hopes to make them available in China's biggest cities by late 2026. Things went from exciting to almost frightening when the US military showed serious interest in these systems every auto company couldn't stop talking about. But contrary to what most people thought, they weren't looking for weapons, but fast and quiet transport systems for soldiers and medics. The idea was that if a soldier needed to reach a remote area urgently, a flying car might be just the right thing. To make this happen, the US Air Force poured billions of dollars into their new tech initiative named Agility Prime. And through this agency, the US Air Force funded various companies and startups like Beta Technologies and Lift Aircraft. It wasn't long before they struck a deal with Joby Aviation, the same company that was receiving help from Toyota to build their better version of a flying car. The auto industry was now focused on the future with so many things happening at once. Looking back now, it's almost crazy to think this was all sparked by a small Japanese tech startup that had barely gotten off the ground 8 years ago. But as exciting as that was, the reality is that many other factors led to this turning point. The reveal of Kawasaki's hoverbike was as important as it was because it happened at a time when battery, lightweight, and autonomous systems were going through very significant upgrades. It was a time when various tech companies were hyper-focused on the future, taking notes from every showcase and expo. If Kawasaki's famous tech demo happened 10 years earlier when car batteries were weak and motors were heavy, it wouldn't have sparked the future revolution we are seeing today. The second factor was the growing problem of traffic in the world's largest cities. Busy places across the world like Los Angeles, Tokyo, London, and Lagos, Nigeria, are plagued by long mornings with people spending hours stuck on the road. Given the potential demand for affordable flying vehicles in these highly populated areas, leading market analysts believe that if companies like Toyota and Hyundai can meet the deadlines they promised, the upcoming industry of flying cars will be worth over $1 trillion by 2035. With multiple governments and militaries pumping in billions of dollars to make flying cars a common really by 2030, what could possibly go wrong? A lot of things, as we shall see. The potential setbacks.
It's been the dream of many for decades, but is it finally becoming reality? A fully convertible flying car recently made its first voyage between two international airports and has now notched up more than 40 hours in the air.
While the future seems bright for the future of transportation, there is still a long way to go for each of these companies. All of the major hitters have promised to deliver on their promises on or before 2030, but there are many reasons not to get too excited, given the circumstances. To explain why, let's begin with Toyota and its partnership with the smaller tech company, Joby Aviation. This company has been a leading player in the race and arguably one of the most promising in recent years. With hundreds of millions of dollars poured in almost every year, it seems Toyota is well on the way to beating Hyundai and General Motors in making the dream a reality. The problem is that the projects they are funding require a lot more money than they expected. Between 2021 and 2023, Joby has used over $800 million to fund their engineering. They are nowhere close to mass producing these machines, yet it has been estimated that Joby would likely need at least $500 million by the end of next year to meet the 2028 deadline promised by Toyota. Even now, Joby is still in the process of getting approval from the Federal Aviation Administration. This process takes years to complete, and the product they are working on for Toyota would likely never launch until authorization is complete. On top of that, this vehicle they are working on is much more complex than manufacturing a car or a large drone. It is one thing to replicate what Kawasaki and Ali Technologies accomplished a few years ago with a different brand, but it's a much bigger deal to make something that promises to not only be more compact, but also run on renewable energy. But as bad as the situation is for Toyota, it comes nowhere close to what Hyundai is dealing with today. In 2023, the company promised to not only make flying cars for private use, but for commercial purposes as well. This meant thousands of flying Ubers covering the skies by 2028. But the problem remains that building new infrastructure takes much more time and money than they probably expected. For flying taxis to work, they need small landing and takeoff areas built specifically for these vehicles. Unfortunately, this new system is barely in its starting phase of development, and it's also unlikely they will be ready for wide use in 2028, as promised. The FAA made it clear to Hyundai that the air taxis they want to build would have to use existing airports and heliports until they can figure out a more practical system for easy landing and takeoff. But doing this would only limit reach and convenience, making this new transport system just as common as air transportation, except less practical in today's economy. Let's not forget that people struggle with noise pollution being a problem with these future vehicles. While the recent prototypes give a much lesser noise than Kawasaki's X-Turismo, having hundreds of these machines covering our skies with such sounds is far from a good thing. This alone could make the FAA pull all authorizations and send Hyundai back to the drawing board. China faces similar problems with Xpeng Aero HT. Their vehicle works as a mix between a car and a small drone. Though it solves the problem of building smaller airports on almost every street, the air traffic rules are very difficult to come up with. At first, I thought that coming up with good regulations for air travel might not sound like a big deal, but that is, until we consider that it alone was the biggest reason why the production and deliveries of these flying vehicles were delayed from early this year to late 2026. Given the circumstances, it's fair to say Xpeng's plan to launch its flying car in 2026 seems highly unlikely. The same thing applies to Lilium, another tech startup based in Germany. It too is facing setbacks with air traffic regulations. But it doesn't stop there. Earlier this year, they filed for bankruptcy after their debts had gotten to the point of no return. And even with Lilium's financial situation looking abysmal, the company was still hoping to secure a $50 million loan guarantee from the Bavarian government to keep things going. From 2021 up until early last year, they had spent a total of over $1 billion with nothing to return to investors by 2025, and with no firm willing to provide the resources needed for the company, It is unlikely they would be able to launch anything soon, as they also promised to launch their flying cars by late 2028 to compete with Toyota and Hyundai. The other German company heading in that same direction is Volocopter, another tech startup that has made significant progress in making and producing air taxis. The problem came when Volocopter promised and failed to show their flying cars during the Paris Olympics. They hoped to use this event to show what their vehicle was capable of, but the goal was not met, leading to major losses of interest from investors and the public. The plan now is to showcase these vehicles during the 2028 Los Angeles Olympics, but there are still other problems to think about. Getting regulatory approval, developing infrastructure, and ensuring the public is ready for the future promised all sounds like a huge project that is way too complex to accomplish in less than 3 years. But while all these companies haven't made a huge leap into the future they've promised, that doesn't mean they won't do so eventually. With various governments and militaries involved in this upcoming industry, it is surely going to go mainstream and take the world of transportation by storm, and we are here for it. So what do you think? Will any of these companies be able to meet their deadlines, or will we still be waiting for these products 10 years from now? Let us know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Also, click on the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.